The #1 selling product of its kind with over 20 years of research and innovation. Botox Cosmetic, out of botulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Dr. Psych Mom Show. Today, I'm going to be talking about how real women initiate sex, which is different than how that looks in porn, and how porn and expectations that are not real can really hinder your sex life and your overall feeling of closeness within your relationship. And before we get to that, I must tell you to subscribe. My most recent subscriber episode was Jealousy Isn't All Bad, and that will resonate with those of you who are married to avoidant partners who would sooner die than say they're jealous, because that is vulnerable. And so, you end up saying stuff like, don't you even care if somebody else talks to me? And, all the greatest hits of the pursuer distancer dynamic. And of course, about 200 other episodes for $8.99 a month. So you should definitely click on the link in every episode description where you can subscribe. Okay, so we had a discussion in the secret Facebook group. And of course, you should all join the secret Facebook group. That's also linked in the episode descriptions. Great people in there. But anyway, talking about how women initiate. And a lot of guys think that women, and this is also stuff that I talk about in session, of course, with couples and with individuals. And a lot of guys think that women initiate in the ways that they do in porn. And they don't. I mean, they may sometimes when they're young, in the honeymoon stage, drunk or something like that. But most women do not initiate by, taking off their clothes and saying dirty things and grabbing you out of nowhere and acting like they're going to die if they don't have sex, because they're not. They're not going to die if they don't have sex. They don't feel like they're going to die if they don't have sex. So that would be disingenuous. And within a long-term relationship, the signs are much more subtle. The average woman is more shy by a factor of 1 million than women in porn. And so what do? They usually will cuddle, they'll come close, they'll spoon. A lot of women in the group said it's the spoon where you kind of back up into the guy. And, when you're going to sleep or when you're waking up in the morning, stroking the arm, putting your hand on their shoulder, something like that. And guys who don't have a lot of experience prior to their relationship, and so the majority of women that they have seen initiate sex are in porn. I mean, if you really think about it, this is why I tell people not to use porn, because if you look at porn, let's say you even are somebody who thinks they're moderate. You look a couple times a week. So then you got to look through a bunch of stuff to get to something you like. Let's even say you look at 10 different things in a brief session, because, that's pretty quick to look at like 10 different scenes. So then you are seeing 20 women potentially initiate sex in a week. So even if you have sex with your wife 2 or 3 times a week, which would be great, that's still only 10% of what you're seeing. So 90% of the time is women being way, way different. And so think about those numbers the next time, you break out the phone or computer to look at porn, because it really, really impacts what your normal is. So a lot of guys, again, who have limited experience, so then the majority of what they're seeing is on porn, and they've never really thought about, so like a lot of guys will say things like, oh, the women in porn look different, or the women in porn, would do crazier things, but they never think that the entire thing is scripted. Even like all the eye contact and the smoldering gaze and all this stuff, that is not usual for the long-term romantic relationship over time, It's much more subtle. And so then if you already feel like, like you don't have any confidence about yourself and you possibly think that women are out to get men. A great movie about that, by the way. By the time you hear this, it won't be as cutting edge anymore, but was Adolescence. It was about a 13-year-old boy that was watching and reading stuff on the manosphere and incels and what he ended up thinking and all of that. So that's a great Netflix miniseries. But anyway, guys had already kind of have a chip on their shoulder about women, say that if women initiate in these subtle ways that it's not fair and that they have to directly communicate because God forbid the guy could get it wrong and think that they're going to have sex when they're not, which I guess the worst thing in the whole world. Of course it's not, I'm being facetious. And this would somehow be a power play, which was a term used. It's not a power play for your wife to put her hand on you and initiate intimacy in like a shy or subtle way. That's not a power play. That's a good thing. She's initiating sex. And if you misread it within the context of an intimate relationship that is healthy, no harm, no foul. She just wants to cuddle. And you would be able to say that. So let's say that she put her hand on you and then you started to kiss her and then she's like, oh, not tonight. I don't feel well or I'm tired. Oh, well. No harm, no foul. Tomorrow is a different day and we can try again. That's how it goes in a healthy relationship. Now, when guys have very low self-esteem, they feel that rejection is so painful that they can't move forward, or they feel that they're being set up to fail, or that, she's giving mixed signals or something. And that sort of framing can obviously really harm relationships because then she won't touch you anymore. It just has to be one time that you're angry because she touched you. And like any mammal, she's going to learn to never touch you. The ideal in a healthy relationship is that both people can communicate in the other one's language. Like that's real. Both need to be able to read the room. So if the guy wants to initiate in a more aggressive way, which usually a guy does, by starting kissing or starting touching in a more overtly sexual way, okay, that's how he initiates, and then how she initiates, and that's good, and that's his language, and how she initiates is in a more subtle way, and he can learn to read that and to get it right probably at least half the time, which would be a really good hit rate. That would be a good batting average, right? And if you're saying, oh my God, that means that half the time I would be painfully rejected, well, that stuff you want to work on in therapy yourself. Because like if you ask your teenager to hang out, you're going to get a far lower hit rate than that, And if that makes you want to die, then your relationship isn't going to go well. And I have a lot of empathy for that. I have a teenager myself. I have 2. And I have 3 children overall, as I assume everybody knows here that follows me, but you never know. And if anything in parenting works half the time, that's a win, man. That is great. So if you ask your kid to clean their room, every week and they clean it every other week. Wow. I mean, amazing. Like that would be so great. So the point is, or like your boss, like if half the time your boss talks to you is to praise you, awesome. That's so good. And so people forget that the same ratio should apply in an intimate relationship. So if your wife wanted to go out on date night every week, but y'all ended up going out on date night every other week, awesome. Her friends would still be jealous that she goes out on date night every other week. We have to compromise in this life, And so, of course, you're going to want to have sex more than your wife, as I've explained for 7 million episodes, it feels like, probably closer to 1,000 episodes. And great. And so that's just biology. And then, of course, not all the time. There's women who want to have more sex than their husbands. It's about 20% of women, about a third of the women that come into session. But Point being, overall, you're going to want more sex than her. But if you recognize the signals when she wants it and you don't you don't compare her to porn, say that her initiation isn't direct enough, say it's a power play, say that if you get it wrong, then somehow you're going to die and suffer, then guess what? You're going to end up having more sex, because the thing that's the most attractive to women, obviously, is a confident, laid-back guy that is not impossible to get along with, as anybody finds attractive in any regard of any gender. Because when you are terrified that if your husband misreads your cue and you say no, that he will sulk for the next week, then you never want to have sex again. Which is how many sexless marriages start from the woman's perspective, is that because she's not allowed to just, kind of sometimes want to have sex and sometimes not want to have sex, and that's taken very personally instead of understanding that that's how she is and working to make the most of it, then, then she doesn't ever want to have sex, because it turns into this risky endeavor where he's going to get angry and scary. Or sulky, and that's scary too, to withdraw affection completely. As I say all the time, sex is not about sex. When men understand that this cuddling thing can go to sex and cannot go to sex, then they end up with more cuddling that they enjoy. Everything isn't about the orgasm, and men who end up having sex one more time per week and are still unhappy, and I have a podcast episode exactly on that, you can get laid one more time per week, but it won't help anything. Then they're like, oh, basically having one more episode of disconnected brief sex per week, that didn't change anything. What does change something is when a couple gets closer and they have this more cuddly, close, reciprocal, loving relationship, a backdrop of loving closeness. That's what changes your happiness level and your connection and the marriage that your children see, etc. Also, when a woman is in that cuddly mode, it's your game to lose a lot of the time, So a lot of guys then come in like gangbusters and like grab her vagina. Oh, it's game on. No, you grab her vagina, it's game off, game over, And so this is when having these more direct conversations in couples counseling can really help, because it's the first time that a lot of guys hear that even if she's in the mood, if you grab her vagina, she's not in the mood anymore. If you grab her boob, she's not in the mood anymore. And what she means is that she's ready to begin foreplay, which is not touching your vagina. In case you missed all my episodes on that, you could go to my episode Oral Sex on Women, which is a subscriber episode where I specifically address this misconception. But anyway, if she is in that cuddly, warm mode and you sweep in with confident momentum, start kissing her, and overall don't expect her to do the stuff out of porn, then you're probably going to have sex, that's probably what's going to happen. But if you act very anxious and trepidatious, and it's ironic because the same guys who act very anxious and trepidatious about, initiating and are very rejection sensitive, once they get going, they only have this kind of porn routine. So then their wives consider them aggressive, whereas this guy is like the least aggressive guy on the planet, and feels very constantly rejected and insecure, but yet the only script that he knows for how sex goes comes from porn. So then he comes off aggressive and he's doing these things that seem like he's really selfish, like grabbing her genitals before she's aroused, or trying to have sex with her when she's not fully aroused, or trying to go down on her with all the lights on and, staring at her and making all these, like making her feel so exposed and displayed that she doesn't even want to do it. There was another one related to this, and of course I have a whole podcast episode about sex in the dark, but this is another really related one. When a guy is preoccupied, attachment and really anxious, he thinks that the woman wants to shut off the light before sex because she doesn't want to look at him or something, or because she's insecure, because whenever he watches porn, guess what? Porn's in the light. Can anybody guess why? Because that's how you see porn. Like, it has to be in the light, And so, because otherwise you wouldn't see anything. It would be a black screen. So guys are like, oh, I guess that's the default for all normal sex is in the light, when the reality is we didn't even used to have light, like like just a couple hundred years ago, and all sex was pretty much in the dark. And now women want that erotic kind of build up. You don't feel so, it doesn't feel so tacky and exposed. A lot of women, especially if they're more sensitive, and it has nothing to do with any body image issues. It has nothing to do with his body at all, but the guy is so anxious and so trained on porn that he thinks that there has to be like a problem if she wants kind of a more erotic, dim or dark atmosphere, And it's so funny because so many people enhance their sexual connection using blindfolds and sensory deprivation, but somehow that isn't considered, and it's just unilaterally just he thinks that it's bad and related to some bad thing because it doesn't track with porn and it exacerbates his own body image issues, etc. So it's just another example of if you don't work on your own insecurity, you miss cues, you misread cues, you force women to do things they don't like and they don't want, and you end up screwing your sex life up. And this is what couples counseling can really help with, is having these conversations, which are transformative for people who are finally like, oh my God, I finally understand what my partner thinks about in bed, how they're initiating, what could be better, etc. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for listening, and I will talk to you soon. And of course, if you ever do need a therapist, whether couples or individual or a coach, which are often just as good, if not better than therapists for certain things, then reach out to my practice, bestlifebehavioralhealth.com, or else email me, Samantha@drpsychmom.com. Thanks, bye-bye.